Good afternoon, everyone. We are glad to welcome you today to our event. Today's meeting is dedicated to the results of a unique expedition of the Scientific Research Center LAI in Mauritania to the Richat Structure, the so-called Eye of the Sahara. Now, the main initiator and organizer of this journey, Dmitry Pavlov, candidate of technical sciences and researcher of the Laboratory of Alternative History, will speak to you. Please, Dmitry.
First of all, I want to remind you, especially those who haven't seen or attended LAI's preparatory events, why the idea of the expedition arose in the first place, and what Atlantis actually is. Why do so many people stubbornly search for it and long to find it? Atlantis is a myth, and that's exactly how one should treat the information about the existence of this once amazing state called Atlantis. We draw our knowledge from the works of the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. Here is his bust on the left. But he himself was neither a witness nor a participant in any events connected with Atlantis. He referred to his great-great-great-grandfather, the ancient Greek Solon. But even Solon didn't know or see anything about Atlantis himself. He referred to his journey to Egypt, where in one of the temples in the Nile Delta, in the temple of Sais, the priests read to him an inscription carved on the walls of the temple. This inscription told of a remarkable geographical place, with a landscape where, according to the priest's account, a state was located in an extraordinary place. Artists describe this place as a series of concentric islands, with a small round island in the center, all separated by the same concentric rings of water. All the authors who participated in creating this myth included a number of very detailed descriptions, which allowed artists to depict this mystical kingdom, a state that had 10 colonies, described in sufficient detail, even down to which island had what, and what entertainment or political functions each structure served. And when you look at this distinctive geometry of mythical Atlantis and compare it with the real geometry of the terrain of the Richat Structure, the Eye of the Sahara, you can't help but suspect, could this be the very place where, thousands of years ago, as Plato set the time of Atlantis's existence and destruction, Atlantis once was? This is precisely why we planned our expedition, to answer the question and either find something material in this structure, or, on the contrary, close the topic and say there is nothing related to the state of Atlantis there. Here is a computer map of the relief with vertical dimensions exaggerated. You can clearly see that if the lowlands were filled with water, you would see ring-shaped islands and ring-shaped lakes. This is exactly the Richat Structure. On this map, you can also see details that match Plato's account. To the north of this structure there are fairly high mountains, or more precisely, a plateau called Adrar, and to the south there is reason to believe there was a large body of water, which the ancients could have called a sea. Plato also refers to this sea. Modern interpretation of the geological processes that could have led to such a strange ring structure, strange indeed, as there is nothing similar with the same elements found elsewhere on Earth, suggests that although there are some formations that could loosely be called similar, they are quite far from the Richat Structure. This is a unique formation. Here you can see several images of how geologists believe such a combination of uplifts and depressions formed. It is, in essence, an unexploded volcano, a structure that was going to erupt, swelled, but then it changed its mind, the pressure subsided, the layers collapsed, and later erosion created this extraordinary geometry. I tend to trust the opinion of geologists and see no reason to claim that this structure is man-made by Atlanteans, or the result of a meteorite impact, or some kind of wonder weapon. I think the dating and natural origin of this formation are in order. On this map, you see the geographic location of the Richat Structure. This is the western part of North Africa within the territory of Mauritania. Originally, we mapped out a route to travel there. At the time we planned the expedition, one could only fly into the capital, Nouakchott, and from there the road led to the fairly large center of Attar. From there, through the small town of Wardain, we would reach the Richat Structure and return. We also intended to stop by a place called the Monolith, a huge granite outcrop, and then return. But as always, life made its own adjustments. We did not see the monolith, but everything else we planned to visit, we did. In our plans was a visit to the most characteristic places, naturally, the central part of the Richat Structure, suspicious spots like this white patch we wanted to examine, and various traps. We assumed that if Atlantis, as Plato described, was destroyed by a flood, then a massive whirlpool or huge wall of water could have swept everything away. But in some narrow places calm zones could have formed, where fragments of destroyed buildings and statues might remain. Here is one such trap created by nature that we wanted to visit. We were also interested in examining the mouth of a once mighty river that flowed from the plateau into the structure. In some place, if there was a water flow here, there must have been a boundary where the river current met the counterflow of a tsunami. A visit was also planned in advance to a site resembling the ring structure, only on a much smaller scale, about 5 kilometers in diameter, whereas here the diameter is 50 kilometers. We planned to visit and see what nature had created there, hoping this might give a clue as to how such an unusual geometry was formed. Here is a more detailed satellite image. Massive volumes of sand appear to have a structure as if something is pulling them from here toward the northwest coast. We plan to visit the boundary between this yellow zone and the brown zone, which is higher ground. Along this boundary, we hope to find the same kinds of fragments that could have remained from the destruction of Atlantis. We had similar points of interest planned at various locations, right up to the Atlantic coast, where, if anything had been washed away, waves might have periodically thrown it ashore. In the end, as I mentioned in the preamble, the expedition, consisting of 9 participants, took place. We safely arrived to New Arcshot. What does this city look like? A characteristic street view shows a tangle of countless shops, people, cars, and mostly low-rise buildings, usually 1 or 2 stories. The city is huge in area, with a population of over 1 million. The first day of the expedition was not planned for exploring the city, though some of us found the energy to visit various places. Personally, I collapsed and slept until morning. In the morning, we were met by a team with 3 vehicles, each with a local driver, and a Russian-speaking guide, someone we had searched for long and hard to avoid the hassle of translating into French, since that's the main language for such services there. We loaded the vehicles with luggage and expedition gear, which was quite a lot, and set off on the long road. From New Arcshot to Atta is about 500 kilometers. The road was calm, without any adventures along the way. Our first stop to experience some of the charm of this exotic African country was the oasis of Turgid. In this oasis, we found traces of a riverbed that sometimes or once carried water. Here it was dry, but as we gradually moved upstream, we reached sections where water still flowed. It didn't just flow along the bed, but also trickled down from overhanging rocks. This water came from rains that had fallen several months earlier, slowly seeping through the rock mass into the oasis. Thanks to this water, there are trees, life, and so on. There was even a small pool where one could bathe. At that moment, we were still thinking of a normal climate, so no one used the opportunity. Later, I regretted this, because afterward there were no more places to bathe. We never again saw such a body of water as that small pool. Studying this oasis, we were pleasantly surprised to see deposits on the slopes. A closer look showed they were remnants of some ancient mudflow, which had come down who knows how many centuries or millennia ago. Most likely, such mass movements periodically occur in the gorge. This was a good sign for us, because we were hoping to see along our route similar accumulations of debris, among which we intended to search for separate elements of destroyed sculptures or buildings of Atlantis. Here we found nothing, and it was hard to assume anything might be here, given the distance. The oasis is about 200 kilometers from the eye of the Sahara, and protected by high mountains. Still, it was encouraging that there was something, giving us hope to search further. Moving from this oasis toward our goal, we saw absolutely stunning views of various flat-topped mountains of the plateau. In some places, we stopped to take photographs. These views are truly mesmerizing and worth seeing, even without any connection to Atlantis. Finally, we approached the eye of the Sahara itself. We did not stay in the open field, as we had initially planned during the early, enthusiastic stage of preparation. At first, we thought we would take tents, set up camp directly near the structure, and live out in the open air. But common sense prevailed when we learned that in the nearest settlement, called Wardane, marked by this arrow, there is a fairly comfortable hotel, about 1 or 1.5 stars. We stayed there for all 5 nights we spent in the immediate vicinity of the Richat Structure. Here is one of the buildings of the hotel. Inside, everything was quite decent. In any case, when choosing between a tent with scorpions or other creatures and a room here, the choice was obvious. This was much more comfortable. And most importantly, in the evenings there was internet, without which a modern person now feels completely out of place. So, spending every night in this hotel, we made daily trips to the site, since we had cars and drivers fully at our disposal. Each day we drove to different points of interest. I won't describe it in strict chronological order, but will just highlight some key locations. The first thing we examined on the way was a dam across a long dry riverbed. This dam is clearly modern. At first, we thought the locals simply wanted to hold back some water to irrigate their gardens and fields. But it turned out, no. Water really does appear here, usually once a year during the rainy season. However, this dam is installed to prevent water from flowing from the lower part of the river to the upper part. It seems strange, but the locals explained that the water from below comes with salt, and salt kills the few remaining plants. Continuing along this dry riverbed, we saw that its banks grew wider and wider apart. Eventually, before even reaching the Richat Structure, the river delta spread out into a kind of small inland sea. It resembled a deep-water lake. This area was a lowland, and the farther we went, the more it resembled a dried seabed. For example, already in close proximity to the first ring of the structure, visible here on the horizon, the landscape looked exactly like a dried-up sea. If there had been inflow, as a computer map with an added water layer shows, there could have been a substantial body of water. In times when the climate here was wet, and there is every reason to say that it once was, water could have filled much of this area. Flying over the region today, one sees thousands of dry riverbeds from the air. Our first stop to examine what these ridges and elevations are like took us to the location marked by this arrow. There, we found our first man-made object. It turned out to be very primitive, a circular stone structure. Obviously, time had not spared it, and even if it once had higher walls, only the lower courses remained. The central part was completely filled with sand. I am not inclined to consider this a find connected in any way with legendary Atlantis. Most likely, it is a burial site from centuries or millennia ago. But it was interesting to see that people had been here, leaving traces. And if people appeared here, then something from Atlantis could have been left as well. Greetings to the supporters of the Laboratory of Alternative History. I suggest visiting the site atlant.gg. The trips continue. In September, we are planning a cruise on the Nile. From October 22nd, there will be the new expedition to Mauritania, to the Richat Structure. Judging by the trip in November, it will be great. Sign up. Also, by visiting atlant.gg, you will see that in March we are planning a trip to Mexico. You can also sign up for this unique expedition across Mesoamerica. And Egypt will definitely happen. It is a frequent destination for us. Every month there are new travel options, among them will be an expedition to the Dolmens of the Caucasus, Iran, and Baikal, twice. In August, there will be a Baikal trip searching for traces of an advanced civilization, which no one has yet found there. Maybe we will be lucky. And in September, for fishing enthusiasts, there will be a special trip to Baikal to catch omul in the most interesting ways. And, I repeat, we most often travel to Egypt. This is linked to my personal interest. In the near future, we will also go frequently to Mauritania. So, study our program of travels and expeditions, and join in. Let's go together. Now, back to our trip. Our next stop was in the very center of the Eye of the Sahara. Here, it was striking how the most central structure suspiciously resembled, well, I tried to photograph this depression as best I could. It would give the full impression of a volcanic crater if this ridge went all the way around in a ring and closed. But this ridge exists only on 3 sides. On the 4th side, the wall is destroyed, as if lava had come out. However, we found no remains of lava, which is why geologists say it is not an erupted volcano, but one that only swelled. Supporting this is the fact that the rock here in the center, forming the structure, is scientifically called breccia, a mixture of stone fragments cemented together. This gives geologists reason to say processes were underway here, but no eruption occurred. We were also surprised to see here a building that locals called a hotel. But this hotel is no longer operational. The owner who built it died several years ago, and his heirs did not want to continue his work. The building has fallen into neglect. A wild idea even arose to contact the relatives, buy the building, and create a functioning hotel here, because interest in the Richat structure grows every year, and I think it will certainly continue to grow. But we have set this idea aside for now. And here we discovered a very surprising circumstance. Sergei will tell you more about it in detail in his final report in January, but I will just show you a frame. Among these stones, right here, when we set up our device, I had brought it along just in case to test. It was a radiometer, capable of measuring in 3 ranges, alpha, beta, and gamma. In the gamma range, it showed a level about 15 times higher than normal. Of course, this couldn't fail to interest us, and we spent some time investigating. Sergei will hopefully tell you more about it. I will move on. There was another structure we noticed, similar to the one we saw at the very beginning, but this one was built from stone by a shepherd. He kept his animals here and sheltered from the wind, bad weather, or the sun. Clearly, this has nothing to do with legendary Atlantis. From the elevation here, you could see the surrounding landscape. Indeed, those who say the Richat structure is so huge that, without knowing about the rings, you wouldn't suspect them are right. Even binoculars didn't help in determining the ring structure. Here is a volcanic outcrop at the highest point. Someone, with a careful hand, had arranged several stones into a ring, marking the geometric center and maximum elevation. We didn't add or remove anything, just photographed it. In the distance, on the horizon, you can see the next ring wall. It's quite a distance away. On foot, it would take at least an hour or 2. By car, of course, it's much faster, though not every road can be handled by the vehicle tires, and sometimes the drivers would stop and say, "I won't go further, you'll have to walk." These volcanic outcrops were most likely slowly pushed out by internal pressure, eventually crumbling into dust on the surface. While exploring the area, we discovered clusters of bluish stones. Those who have looked into the subject have probably seen internet photos of such blue rocks. In reality, they are not quite as bright, most likely there was some contrast enhancement in the photos. Still, these stones do have a bluish tint. A closer look at these deposits suggests they are residual rock. In my amateur opinion, this indicates there were once hot springs here, with a warm shallow lagoon, where special algae grew. These algae mixed with sand, creating this layered sediment and giving the stones their bluish color. If I am wrong, specialists in sedimentology can correct me. In any case, we brought samples back and will try to get comments from experts. We set up camp not far from the center. These 2 tents were our shelter. The locals cooked for us. Their food was tasty, but in their own way. Anyone going there should definitely try the local cuisine, you can't miss it. Near the campsite, there was a small oasis, meaning water was nearby. One of our first research tasks was to dig, not just anywhere, but in a meaningful spot. You can see these white streaks, indicating that streams once flowed here. Possibly they still run during the rainy season. At the junction of 2 stream beds, we chose a spot with a fairly thick layer of clay and began digging. We started enthusiastically, then broke a pickaxe, got tired in the 30+ degree C heat, and without much skill, we gave the work to people better suited for it. Our helper, a man nicknamed the Pike, worked like an excavator, and eventually dug us a couple of pits. In them, we could see how deep the clay layers lay, and how they transitioned to stony layers beneath. In the first pit, the clay layer was about 40 centimeters thick. The pit dug another meter deeper was entirely stone not rounded, meaning these 40 centimeters were likely deposits that formed during the period when fertile soil from the ring structures was carried down into this lowland as the climate changed, and then hardened here in the stream beds. Perhaps from this soil, radiocarbon dating can be done. The fertile layer could help determine its age. The numbers I have are on the order of 8 to 11,000 years, close to the date Plato mentioned, around 12,000 years. Next, our interest spread to a nearby dry lake. The diameter of this lake is over 3 kilometers. Picking a spot, all points were equally valid, we decided to dig here too. We dug at first ourselves, then again called our more capable helper. He dug a pit about 1.8 m deep. Visibility was poor, but the main result is that the 1.8 m depth still contained clay sediments. Hopefully someday someone, maybe even us, will dig down to the bedrock to see how many meters thick these once fertile soils, blown down from the heights. And maybe at the very bottom, at the boundary between soil and rock, something interesting lies. For now, we haven't found anything there. Here are the 2 points, this large dried lake, and the first pit we dug in this location. After successfully opening the clay layers, we took a group photo with the diggers and our Russian-speaking guide for memory. Looking ahead to future work, since the surface area here is enormous, research will be needed in the future. If it happens, it would be good to work with ground-penetrating radar. A GPR could show a good contrast of any inclusions at the bottom of this dry lake. Then digging could be done not blindly, but purposefully in areas where anomalies are detected. Leaving the Richat Structure in the evening after the end of our first day, we encountered a large number of vendors selling various items. Among them were artifacts, unfortunately, mostly primitive in nature, suggesting that in the past tribes lived here hunting animals with stone-tipped arrows and spears. Technogenic or suspiciously technogenic objects were rare, but they did appear. One of these is the so-called disc. We saw more than a dozen of them in various places. One of them was not gifted, but loaned to us for study. We sent it to a laboratory. The results of the microparticle analysis, which could have remained on the surface of this disc, are not yet known. So far we only know it is not ceramic, it is stone, most likely sandstone. As we know from Egypt, sandstone can preserve for thousands of years even the tiniest crystals of metals used in processing. We hope there will be something unexpected in the chemical composition of these micro-inclusions. For now, we don't know. By the end of the working day, it was already getting dark. In the evenings we gathered in a special spot for dinner. Our spirits sought more conversation, so we hung up an improvised screen and talked. We discussed Egypt, and the mood called for watching White Sun of the Desert, just like our cosmonauts. For some reason, we wanted to watch Sukhov, Abdullah, and said, "Whoever goes there will take this film with you. After what you see at the Richat Structure, you will probably want to watch it too." The next day, our research continued. The goal of our second day was to visit not the center, but the first ring of elevations. The cars dropped us at this point and then sent us on foot, warning us we had to return by lunchtime. These relatively gentle peaks offer beautiful, interesting views. I recommend hiking some routes if you go there. Here are just a few sketches. Some of our team members looked like cosmonauts, protecting themselves from the sun and the occasional strong wind. The landscape all around was mostly lifeless, rocky desert, sometimes interspersed with large dunes. The dunes are very picturesque, which inevitably brought back White Sun of the Desert. Sometimes we formed a chain, climbing up the ridge. Just like in White Sun of the Desert, there was a moment when Comrade Sukhov finds a man buried in the sand by the bandits, and this time, I got to play that man. From the summit of this first ring elevation, you could see the surrounding landscape. In the distance lay the second ring, but we didn't risk going further, we wouldn't have made it back in time. Beyond that was the plateau. We turned around, took some commemorative photos, and headed back. On the way, we crossed the same sands and dunes again. One curious moment, we searched for stones with any trace of ancient animals or plants. The environment is completely sterile. No matter how many stones we broke open, we found no fossils. Remembering what geologists say, that the Richat Structure is around 500 to 600 million years old, this age falls into the Precambrian period. As we know, life in its maximal diversity is thought to have appeared during the Cambrian explosion, and before that there were few plants or animals. Perhaps this is indirect confirmation of the accuracy of geologists' dating of the Richat Structure. We took a short rest in the shade of rare trees. During this rest, an unusual version was proposed to add to various theories of the Richat Structure's origin. I have already said that there are no known exact analogues of the ring structure on Earth. So I decided to look in space, and it turns out there is a similar ring structure on Mars. There, however, it is confidently interpreted by specialists as the result of a meteorite impact on a subsurface of varying depth, which explains its circular geometry. I think they are right, because you can see the traces of material ejection. But the version proposed during this break was that we recalled how Andrei Sklyarov argued for the version that the Earth's size is not constant. For at least the last 180 million years, it has been growing in diameter, roughly doubling. To check how the crust of a growing Earth might deform, I took a model ball and slowly layered plasticine on it. I saw that cracks did not form as ring structures. That was the point. The dynamics of Earth's growth do not create ring structures. I didn't find a mode where ring structures appear. But I did find a mode where a long, nearly straight crack along a diameter appears. On Mars, those who study its surface geometry know of the enormous canyon called Valles Marineris. It looks very similar. It seems that not only Earth is expanding, but Mars too. But that is a separate topic. If anyone is interested, you can find Sklyarov's lecture, or I have a similar talk myself. I am 99.9% certain that the Earth's diameter is growing, just as the giant planets grow, soon to become stars. And most likely, stars also grow. But that's a side topic. Let's return to the Richat structure. Here I've marked with an arrow the target of our next day's journey, to that small concentric ring visible there. In this separate photo, it suspiciously resembles a circular mountain ridge. But when we arrived at the site, we saw no elevations at all, at least none visible to the naked eye. Across the nearly 5 kilometers diameter of this ring stretched almost complete flatness. To make things less dull, we simply drew a circle with our feet around a stone someone before us had placed, marking the center of this flat formation. So we can close the question about this second small ring. It isn't a ridge at all, just differences in rock colors and sparse vegetation. During our travels, we often saw camels. In general, there is a surprising amount of life there, though it's fairly monotonous: camels, goats, and sheep. One more day we decided to dedicate to climbing the plateau. The road there was long, and along the way we passed through many changing landscapes. This scene caught our attention. It looked like rows of potatoes. Of course, it wasn't potatoes, but some local plants. Still, the variety and abundance of these plants was striking. As we approached the plateau, the vehicles refused to go further. The ground, a bed of mostly rounded pebbles, showed that once there was abundant flowing water here. The water that ran off the plateau, flowing over these stones, had rounded them just like waves do on a seashore. Here, though, it wasn't surf at work, but currents. Moving over this pebble bed, we found several dry watering holes. Clearly, during the rains, local animals come here to drink, meaning this area periodically fills with water. When we asked locals about it, they said June or July are the months with the most water. In one place, we found a shed snakeskin. So there are live snakes here, though we didn't encounter them. The danger is real. Along the bed of a former watercourse, we saw exposures where the channel bordered the soil. Specialists are needed to study which layers formed in which eras. The lower layers resemble fertile soil, a sign of life-bearing sediment. Our goal was to reach the summit. We climbed along a gully, and eventually some of our group managed to reach the top, though not all. There were definite difficulties in climbing, and a risk of slipping and staying there forever. So it was sensible to let only those most prepared for rock climbing go all the way. From the summit, they could photograph the structure as fully as possible. Here's one such shot. The point is marked here. Theoretically, the entire ring structure should be visible from here. In practice, it wasn't visible in full, only in part. But even seeing a crescent was enough for ancient people who might have climbed such a height to suspect the presence of multiple ring-shaped mountains and lakes. From this ascent, we conclude that ancient people who reached this peak, whether hunters or travelers, could have known they were looking at a formation of multiple concentric islands and lakes. We took a few panoramic shots. Anyone interested can later download and examine them in detail. On the way back, after we finished our time at the Richat Structure, we drove toward Chinguetti. Along the way, we stopped where sand met darker ground, hoping to find some fragments left by a former tsunami. We didn't find any shells, no building foundations, and certainly no statues, as if everything had been swept away, maybe even buried to a depth of several meters. Not even foundations were visible. On the way back toward Atta, there were again picturesque views of the mountains. At one spot, we were invited to see Fort Sagan, the famous fort built for the film of the same name. We declined on the spot, which we regretted later. In the future, of course, this fort should be visited, along with watching the film. For some reason, after returning to Nouakchott, everyone wanted to watch that film, perhaps because it was shot against the backdrop of the very mountains we had just seen. On the road back, we stopped at dry riverbeds to examine sections cut by powerful water flows when they once ran here. The height of the cut bank was over 3 meters, and the length several hundred meters. We walked along it, but again, not a single shard, not a single suspicious fragment that could be called an artifact. Maybe we just didn't have enough time, or maybe we weren't lucky. Our expedition ended at the Atlantic coast, where we had planned to go. In the final days, those who come to Mauritania can spend the last day on the ocean shore, perhaps even at this very restaurant, since we've already checked it out. In general, ending the last day by the ocean would be a good conclusion to such adventures. As for our results, what we witnessed and saw with our own eyes, I won't read aloud now. While I say this, you can read them. In short, just a few points that support our main conclusion. We have seen the place of the legend that reached Plato, and where Plato placed his legendary Atlantis. But we have not yet found anything indicating that the Atlanteans themselves were here. Overall, I believe the probability of discovering traces of this highly advanced Atlantean civilization here is rather low, about 80 to 90% that there was nothing. But there remains a 10% chance that the destructive forces were so great that everything ever built was either swept into the Atlantic Ocean or ground to dust. The main conclusion, despite the lack of 100% proof of the Atlanteans' presence, searching for them is still possible and necessary. I have outlined several directions for possible future exploration. First of all, the canals. In Plato's descriptions, there is mention not only of the Richat structure itself, here it is, but also of canals leading from Richat toward the sea, which could have meant the ocean. There are suspiciously straight, shallow lines, very similar to canals with locks, visible on Google Maps. We placed points along these lines, and they form a fairly logical straight path. On closer inspection, these channels really resemble canals. During our expedition, we didn't have a special trip to these sites. It would have taken an extra day or two. In the future, visiting these points, or at least some of them, is necessary. If we find worked rock surfaces around such a canal, we can conclude that the canal is man-made, and then the chances that the Atlantean civilization was here rise sharply. All of this essentially forms one straight line connecting the eye of the Sahara with the nearest large river, the Senegal. This river still flows there today. The most direct and convenient route is not straight to the Atlantic Ocean, but specifically to this river. This would be logical. Second direction, excavations of the large dried lake more than 3 kilometers in diameter, but necessarily using ground-penetrating radar. Perhaps a slightly modified GPR will work, giving us information about what lies under the thick layer of soil. It should be noted there is not just one such lake. To the south there are 2 more large dried basins. These 2 could be investigated. Third direction, during spontaneous searches for points of increased radioactivity, we found 2 locations about 200 m apart. We suspect there are more. These should be mapped. Fourth direction, though harder to implement, is the edge of the oceanic shelf near Nouakchott. This yellow area marked on the map is identified by hydrologists as a landslide area several hundred kilometers wide. The deposits of this landslide are dated by hydrologists to about 12,000 years ago. The coincidence of this date is unsettling. This raises the possibility that everything once on the coast of Mauritania ended up here, on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, ground to dust. The probability is not 0. But such an expedition, with deep-sea submersibles and dredging the seabed, is a completely different level than what the laboratory of alternative history can currently manage. Perhaps someday, together with partners who have millions of dollars, such research can be carried out. For now, we can only outline the plans. And so, my final slide, I urge you to travel with us. Visit the site atlant.gg. The nearest expedition that will continue the work of this one is scheduled for October 22nd of the coming year. 3 potential participants have already said they are willing to continue the research. So join us, maybe one of you will be among the members of this second expedition of the Laboratory of Alternative History. Thank you.